The cast of the Descendants Trilogy has certainly had their fair share of ups and downs over the last few years, as well as emotional and heartbreak real-life turn of events. But today we adjust our focus to the final day of filming on the set of Descendants 3. Dove Cameron and Sophia Carson shared many images on social media during the last moments on the set of Descendants 3. Sophia specifically wrote, "Dear world, today is the wrap on Descendants 3. There will never be enough words. From the very bottom of my heart, thank you." She shared an image of herself alongside all of her co-stars, including the late Cameron Boyce. She added, "We will forever and always be your Evie, Mal, Jay, and Carlos." Over the following days, the group shared their goodbyes, as well as final photos from the set, images of their last day shopping in the local grocery store, and even photos of their US border control passes. The ending of the Descendants trilogy was bittersweet for all of those involved. Sophia Carson specifically shared a story in which she says that actors laid on the ground on the set after filming had concluded, talking with one another for hours upon end. She said they were eventually forced to leave while still wearing their full costume attire from the film. The cast later shared images of them driving away from the set, and they all certainly seemed to be quite happy and excited about the project that they had just completed. There were several moments during Descendants 2 that some of the actors claimed could have jeopardized the film entirely. In one specific instance, the weather outside became so bad that they were afraid they would need to shut down filming. The director began to fear for the young actors' safety, but they all assured him that they wanted to continue. They powered through, and the film was eventually completed regardless of filming setbacks. After the conclusion of the second film, the actors were scheduled to return home. However, since filming was taking place in Vancouver, they decided to spend the night at Dylan's, who just happened to live nearby. This was certainly a relatively lucky break for the group, as they had just exited an extremely busy day of filming and must have been, well, exhausted. A lengthy plane flight home certainly wouldn't have helped much. What made the night even more interesting, though, is that it was Halloween night. Even after filming, the group decided to dress up and spend the night celebrating. They shared many photos on social media and watched scary movies until about 4 a.m. when they all fell asleep. That is, except for Dove and Thomas. The two of them were the only two to remain, and they decided to walk across the street to McDonald's. However, they soon learned that McDonald's was closed. This seems a bit strange since nearly every McDonald's location is open for, well, 24 hours, but maybe location hours vary in Vancouver? I don't know. Dove and Cameron say that they were just walking around the McDonald's getting ready to head back to Dylan's house when they heard footsteps creeping up behind them. They were utterly mortified and didn't know what exactly to do. After all, it was Halloween night. It's not uncommon for individuals to dress up as monsters, villains, or even serial killers. Because of this, at what point could you tell if this was individual genuinely meant to cause you harm, or was it simply someone dressed up in a spooky manner trying to scare you? The two turned around and saw a very large man in a chicken costume right behind them. They were certainly filled with fear, but continued to casually walk back to the house, which was only a few blocks away. However, they say that the man followed them almost the entire way home. He was thoroughly creeping them out, as every time they would turn around to see if he was still following, he would just stop and stand perfectly still. He followed behind them for several blocks, causing them to be in an utter panic. Dove says that at that moment she came to terms with the fact that they were about to die. They said as they approached Dylan's house, they began to walk much faster. However, at that moment, the chicken began running and charging towards them. Thomas stayed behind Dove just a few feet. After all, the two were dating at the time, and he felt it was his duty to protect her. They eventually made it inside, with the chicken only steps behind. They locked the doors to the home, but the chicken still did not leave. He began banging on the door of the house, trying to find his way in. When that didn't work, he walked over to the windows and began banging on them as well. Frustrated, he then made his way to the back of the house and began banging on those windows as well. At this point, everyone in the house is wide awake. Several of the friends came running up from the basement of the home trying to figure out what was going on. They spoke briefly for a moment and realized that the chicken had gone away. They then realized that one of their friends was still in the basement of the home, and they began to fear that the chicken may have gotten in through the basement door. They planned to call the police, but just in that moment, a gentle knock came at the door. Dylan approached the door and opened it, and it was the chicken. Just then, Thomas pushed everyone aside and pounced on the chicken ready to attack. Just as he did so, everyone began yelling at him to stop. Confused, he stopped. As it would turn out, their friend Danny had been the one in the costume the entire time. The other friends were all aware of this, but Dove and Thomas had no idea. Danny pulled the costume off in tears as he had just been pummeled by Thomas. Dove says that Danny was just fine, but she certainly took a bit of a beating. The group made amends after the attack, and all was well between them. It's certainly terrifying to think of what could have happened if the group hadn't been able to stop Thomas's attack. Danny could have been seriously injured, or worse. They all laughed at the fact, but seriously, with stunts like this, you have to be extremely careful. Many people will enter fight or flight mode and not fully understand when to stop. Overall, it is safe to assume that the cast of The Descendants had a wonderful time during the making of the 3 films. The cast is sure to hold some moments in higher regard than others, but they all seem to have built a long-lasting bond that won't soon fade. It's a shame to see how such a great franchise reach its conclusion, but it's heartwarming to understand that the friendship that is now shared between all of those actors.